You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine. And I've got to tell you something good because it's what led me to our guest today. Our guest is Kelley Harrell, and you'll hear all about her things that she dives into and her nature work, her work as an elder, her shamanic work. But I found Kelley through just browsing through the Shaman's Directory. And if you don't know that, you should check it out because it is a collection of people who practice any sort of shamanic work, ceremonies, soul retrieval, connection to the elders, any sort of thing in many mythologies, Celtic and Norse and Peruvian and South African, but you should check it out. And that's how I found Kelley Harrell. Kelley, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Having me.
So the little I know about Kelley is what I read about her, and she has worked deeply with the land and through that has developed a deep understanding of being an elder and being an ancestor, and pulls together her shamanic background and Norse mythology. So I'll let her tell you all about that.
Thank you. Yes, my lens is animistic. My work primarily focuses on death work, which encompasses quite a lot of things, including ancestor tending and shadow work. I work through my practice, Soul Intent Arts, for almost 30 years now to help people create ethical, sustaining spiritual paths that are based on their ancestral lines and ecosystems. My personal path tends toward Seidr, which is a Norse tradition, as well as Druidry, and some indigenous Irish spiritual teachings. But I don't teach these things. I feel like where I'm standing in the world, my positionality, I'm not any one of those things, and they are a blend for me that I feel like would be infringing to some degree to say, well, I'm a Norse shaman or I do Irish work. And so for me, it is helping other people find their ancestral lines, what those traditions might have been, and how they can bring those forward in the ecosystem where they are now in a way that's ethical.
So when you say death work, explain to us what that encompasses.
Ideally, when we die well. And what I mean by that is we die with our traumas reconciled so that we don't take them with us to keep us unquiet, and we don't leave them behind for our descendants to have to pick up, or our communities to have to pick up and deal with. And so my work is to help people die well, sometimes folks who are terminally ill, or to help dynamics where family members have not moved on well. There's something that has been left undone. It's also to help land spaces that are restless for whatever reason. They have spirits that have not moved on to help them do that. And one of the things that really started to tip me in the direction of elder work, or like thinking in my own sphere of my own elderhood, was realizing after doing years of death work with people there is a component that I would see over and over unaddressed, and that was understanding who was going to be the elder in the family. Like, ideally, we have these conversations around the dinner table before we need to deal with these transitions, but we don't. Most of us don't. And so part of what I would find that kept souls back was not having had an elder, like the commendation of their experiences, their knowledge, their wisdom, and also kind of their energy to some degree, part of their life force to anchor back into the family line or into the community in some way. And so that's also a part of death work that I spend a lot of time cultivating and helping people to find release with.
When you say elder, you're talking about a living person in the family structure. Okay. And
Yes.
when you talk about ancestor, then that is the person who has passed on.
Yes.
We know I'm struck by, I don't know what you cut your teeth on, but one of the things that I read that triggered me to move to a more understanding spiritually and connection to the land and family lineage was Carlos Castaneda's books.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he was really big on, or at least that stuck with me, was recapitulation.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that process of looking at your life and really reconciling each piece. And then when I studied Peruvian shamanism with Alberto Violda, we did a lot of um, clearing the effects of past lives from our trajectory, but also then it evolved to, with other teachers, cleaning up our biologic, energetic, and spiritual lineage.
Mm-hmm.
And we can carry forth, and you could talk a little bit about this. We carry forward not just in our genetics that are making our day to day biochemistry, but our genetic memories. And then you add to that, which shamanic people talk about, are the imprints left in our energy body. So we carry forward all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
And
And
then also, Kelley, tell me if this rings true for you. We've been taught, many of my shamanic and energy teachers, that if we can clean it up in our field, we actually heal those who have gone before us. And I used to tease people and say, we talk about pay it forward, but this is really pay it backward. So
absolutely.
that's rings true for you.
It does. And I would even one up that another ante, which is when we have that experience of truly shifting our own relationship to our traumas, when we reconcile these things and we're able to do ancestor work in helping people who have not died well. They're not in a place where they can share their gifts. And in fact, they're probably creating harm from not being able to move on. When we can help them do that, they can then help do that healing backward also, even further than we can. And
Mhm.
and that's part of their job. I mean, it's part of what is supposed to have been happening all these thousands of years that we haven't done our death work thoroughly, at least in this
Mhm.
culture. I can't speak to anywhere other than American
Mhm.
settler culture. But we have a backlog. We have a backlog of dead who have not passed on properly. They have not had their rights effectively, and they contribute to the crescendo of stress and anxiety, and in
Mhm.
some cases, harm, like actual possessive harm. So when we can release this from ourselves, we are no longer contributing to that. And when we can do that work with beings who didn't have that opportunity in their lifetimes, they become beings who then even work further back in our ancestral lines to help other beings reach that same space.
I was thinking one of my first big steps, I would say, in healing my anxiety, my anger, always telling the story of the dysfunctional family was dropping that story, dropping that, oh, well, I'm this way because my mother was so and so, or I'm this way because my father made me, or, that kind of story that so many of us carry, that we define ourselves by what our parents didn't do right for us. Dropping that story for me is one of the most powerful, um, really initial and important integral step to clearing that whole flow, that biologic and energetic flow of lineage energy, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I don't know if I would use the word dropping it, but realizing that they parented the way they did because they didn't have whatever they needed either. And that was a really key thing I wanted to put forward in the book. Like, this book isn't about blaming your parents or your grandparents or whatever for your state of your life. It's about realizing how big the gap of having fit elders who had done these processes and in their relationship with nature, like maintained their sense and awareness of oneness. It goes way back. It goes back generations. And
Mhm.
so for me, I think kind of the same outcome of realizing they didn't have it either. And neither did their parents or their parents or their parents way back. And there's an allowance to drop blame when you
Right.
can make that kind of understanding. And when I drop the blame, I've got more room to do the work I really need to be focused on.
And also for me, when I was able to drop that blame, when my view wasn't clouded by poor me and anger and, wishful thinking that that was something else, I started to see the good stuff I got. I started to
Yes.
see the courage they had in really hard situations for their own growing up, and how they did a really good job navigating in circumstances that I never really understood. So it does, when you take away that, take off your dark glasses, and then you can start to see the light in places, can't you?
I think that's a really important point because there's a lot of emphasis on ancestor work right now, and I think that's wonderful. I think it's needed. I think it is like the part of the conversation, particularly in shamanic communities that we've needed to move into. But it also has to, I don't know, we have to really step into being able to, I don't know, take it further to whatever the next part of that understanding is, and release the blame, because we also have shame tied up in that. And
Mhm.
we can't get to the good stuff while we're holding on to shame. And something that I see happening for a lot of the European diaspora in American culture is deep shame about how our ancestors have contributed to kind of the state of things at present. And I think it's good that we make that connection. It's good that we understand that. But they also brought a ton of strength and skills and gifts that we have access to, but we can't fully access them until we get rid of our own shame about how we ended up where we are.
Mhm. So let's segue into a thing that you talk a lot about in your book, From Elder to Ancestor. And I'd like to talk and have it kind of morph into talk about the settler centric way of living. And then if we could sort of extend that into what I see as part of our problem coming here, leaving our, whether it was Eastern European, Irish,
Mhm.
Scottish, English, French, whatever, we left our land.
Yes.
So why don't we talk about that?
I got chills. Um, when I say settler centric, this is something that I talk about a lot in the book, settler culture. I mean the way of life that has developed from the colonization of America, the forced taking of land and resources from the indigenous people of this place. And we've kind of like romantically called that manifest destiny. We've called it doctrine of discovery, but they just don't have the ring that forced colonization has. And I think that's something we have to sit with, and we have to realize how we got here. One of the exercises that I have students do in the 2 year training that I mentor is really tracing how you got here. And it's not easy. It's usually not pleasant, and it's incredibly illuminating to understand the sacrifices that were made to get you here. But there's also the realization of a lot of privilege in that that maybe some people weren't owning before. And that's kind of the modus operandi of settler culture, is that in that mentality of colonization and taking land, taking resources, displacing people, if not enslaving people, is this dichotomy of someone is on the top and someone is on the bottom. And part of the colonization is to keep that structure intact, keep it from changing. So, like, it really is a part harming of the land, harming of the humanity that has stewarded that land, which is part and parcel with we are nature. We are not part of nature. We are nature. So when we harm nature, when we harm each other, it's all in relationship.
And one of the things that is happening, and maybe it started in the 60s. I don't know if you're old enough to remember back then. Um, but this hunger for the way the indigenous did it. In America, it's mostly about Native Americans of the Southwest, but the hunger for that indigenous energy, and even though sometimes we appropriate it a bit superficially, I think there's a deeper hunger. What do you sense that, and what do you think that's all about?
Absolutely. I would not make light of appropriation on any level, but I experience that as a displaced yearning for your own indigeneity, your own land-based identity. And on some level, that yearning means you realize you're a stranger here. You have not been in unbroken relationship with the ecosystem that sustains and supports you. And so then what do you do with it? Like, it's logical that you're going to look to the people around you who do have that relationship, but we haven't done it in any respectful way for the most part. It has been poaching and appropriating. And so, like, trying to shift that lens to what are your ancestral lines? What are your genealogical relationships? And sometimes even trying to figure those out can be really fraught and painful. It's not easy for everybody to even find those records or people who would have that information. So, as much as we can to learn what our land-based identities were, which is probably more than one at this point, and to learn what the indigenous practices of those people were, but also to be careful not to romanticize that and displace people who are still in those regions, who have like fought out their own relationship to what indigeneity means and what other forces have colonized there. Absolutely. I think we have to, particularly as Americans, look back at that and understand our own immigration to this place and what that means for us spiritually now.
So I'm going to tell you a kind of a woo-woo story. I live in very rural South Central Pennsylvania. And when I was finishing medical school and then went to residency, I kept telling myself I want to go somewhere where I have a house that I can walk to the barn because I want a horse. And I want to live because once I had visited Amish country because it had these gentle rolling hills. And a job opportunity came up, and I landed literally in a place that you would have, I mean, it just was nothing like where I was, where had been all my life. And it was everybody was saying, "Why are you going there?" I said, "I can't explain it. I'm called to go there." And several years later, I had this older gentleman as a patient, and I reflected that perhaps a year prior, my aunt had sent me a photo of an old woman in a bonnet and the white laced collar dress, and her last name was Fogelsanger. Well, I'm Martin. What's Fogelsanger? And so it was interesting. I had this patient whose last name was Fogelsanger. So I said to him, I said, "Oh, this is wild. I have a great great aunt who's a Fogelsanger." And he told me that one of his family members was making a genealogy. And he Xeroxed it, and it was typed because,
Yeah.
guys in the 60s and 70s who we didn't have computers, and these older folks were typing it all out. And he made me a copy, and I saw how Fogelsanger went to, I think, EBY, which is an Amish or Mennonite name, and then to Miller's. And at the same time, my sister was doing genealogy, ancestry.com probably, and pulled together stuff and found that literally 30 miles from where I live was an old Mennonite church from like the 1700s, early 1800s, where we are related to those people. So here I landed in a geographic area that I had no logical reason to be in, to learn that through a patient of mine who turns out I'm probably related to him, I was able to track that 30 miles away on my mother's father's side, way back, were my ancestors. That's wild.
It is wild.
But I do believe many of us have synchronicities where we are called back to places of connection. Not that we'll always know what they are when we're called there, because I surely didn't know. I thought I had a past life as a Tuscarora Indian here. It felt that I had. But I think we're called, and that brings me to my next question. We talk about this sometimes it's a bit new agey, that we have to restore our connection to the land. We have to get in better relationship with nature. But I think it's not just a new age concept. I think it has real deep. Tell us about that.
Thank you for sharing that story. I love that. Um, I think that it's imperative for us to find our relationship to nature, and it will not be the same for everybody. That's kind of the beauty of it. But we all have to find the way that we are connected into ecosystem. And I don't think until we start to do those explorations for ourselves, we don't realize the grief that it's going to stir up. We don't realize the things that we've lost because of it. And I will say, I think for a lot of European diaspora in American settler culture, it's so far back that we've just we've lost all bearing of what those rights and land relationships would have been. And I call that the broken path. When we, particularly when we have a calling to something that is greater than ourselves and anchored in place, and yet we feel discombobulated around it. We don't have lived teachings or elders who have an unbroken relationship to what those ancestral teachings might have been. So, then we do have to have some sort of exploration of what our relationship to land is. And I think that's also kind of fraught here because we're talking about the exploration of what our ancestral lands would have been, quite possibly in a place we've never even visited and may never visit, as well as the relationship we have to the land where our family has been here, and realizing there may be other people in relationship with this land that you're currently on that do have unbroken ties. They do have rights and nature spirit relationships that have been handed down for thousands of years. So there's kind of like this duality of working out what your ancestral relationship to ancestral lands would be, and also staying respectful that other people have unbroken relationships to the land that you're on right now, and you're still called to be there. You are still called to be in that place and somehow be part of that community in a way that's respectful for everybody involved.
So, talk, if you will, expand on relationships with the land, because I see them as not only spiritual, but energetic. And you mentioned nature spirits, and I'll just share a little where I ended up, the property I ended up buying in 2010. I came down the driveway and I felt it. I felt it. And that summer, I moved in April. And in May, there was a visitation of lights coming out of the woods, multiple fast moving, small lights coming out of the woods, dancing across the garden, dancing across in front of the barn. And I go to bed early because I usually get up really early. So here I am at 10:30 at night looking out the window at these lights, knowing that they were not fireflies, that they were, and these lights danced and performed, and I felt that they were the woods coming out talking to me. And so the next night I got up, I made myself get up at 10:30. Usually I'm sound asleep, and I went to the living room window. And I had such a yearning of connection to this because they felt like the spirit of the land in some way. I didn't know what form or how, and I asked them to come forward. There's nothing, pitch black. And I asked again, and in about 3 minutes of sitting there and saying, I really want to connect to you, all of a sudden, massive, hundreds of dancing lights. And this went on for several days. We had this communion that changed me. And so for me, when you say connection to the land, it's not just that it's beautiful. It's not just that my vegetables grow really well, but I actually feel the energy of it. And sometimes in my mind's eye, it takes form. It feels like, people talk about fairies, they talk about nature spirits. I've never seen them, seen in form or anything, but to me, that's what they were. Tell me about your experience with connecting to land.
That's beautiful. Um, so I grew up with a grandfather who I don't know if he ever even knew the word animist, but he moved through the world as an animist. He had the perspective that everything was alive and we are constantly in relationship. There's a reciprocity happening with everything you're around all the time. And that means that you're responsible for it. We have agency in this world. The way science works here, we have agency. We do things, there's impact from the things that we do. And so my childhood was him reinforcing that nature is aware that we are here. Nature is looking back at us. We're the ones who are missing it. We're the ones who don't really have the awareness. And that's where it started for me. It did not become, I just thought that was like life. Like I thought
Mhm,
everybody,
mhm.
kind of had that. I was older before I realized they didn't. And I had experiences of trauma that led me to seek out shamanic healing from a woman who lived in this area. And that's the point. I was like 25 or something. That's the point that I realized all of this is truly alive all the time. And it's not enough to just know that philosophically. It must be a lived experience. It kind of drives me nuts when people say animism is a belief that everything is alive. No, it is an experience that everything is alive. It is intentionally holding your awareness that everything is alive. And when you can step into that, when you can sit on the porch at 10:30 at night and tell them that you want communion with them, there is a that is a form of reciprocity. That is a way of saying, I see you, I hear you, I know that we're in this together. And that is exactly the kind of invitation that they're waiting for from us. And not just in a necessarily in a prove to me that you exist kind of way, but also in a tell me what you need. Tell me where my voice needs to be in the human community to keep you safe, to make sure you have what you need. And I feel like that's where a lot of ecological studies overlap with animistic perspective super easily and automatically even. I
I
love
think I
that
love that
experience.
because, at first I thought, am I crazy? And then I thought, well, no, I'm not because I can feel it. I can feel that there's an intelligence here. It was so new to me and so otherworldly. I was too scared to go out in the front lawn and sit. I stayed, who knows if these are intelligent beings, surely they could appear inside the house, but I felt safer behind the glass. But that going from that yearning for connection to the real depths of reciprocity where you actually dialogue, you actually ask, what can I do for you? It's not just for me at that moment, I was taking in the wonder. I was absorbed. I was taking and taking and taking. But the more I think elevated place that we should get to is what can I do back for you?
I'm
And
with
when
you
I
on that.
learned to sit in sacred dialogue to say, what can I do back for you? I would say 99 times out of 100, the answer that I got would be some form of be the absolute best that you can be in the world with respect for us. And we'll help you get there. We'll help you do it. And so it wasn't even, well, you need to bring me your firstborn child or, you know, put the fruit and the alcohol on the shrine. It was literally be bigger, be better, and keep us in relationship as you're going forward now into the world.
Mhm. Something that I learned from Sandra Ingerman many, many years ago was that nothing comes to us that isn't coming through our ecosystem. Like we have to be in good relationship with our ecosystem in order to be well, in order to have the things in life that we say or want or need. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think the inverse of that is also true, that when our ecosystem is not well, we can't have what we need as the human counterpart of that ecosystem. And I mean, we're seeing that in climate change. We're seeing
Mhm,
that
mhm,
in, at least where I live, very agrarian area, lots of things in the groundwater. Like we're
mhm,
all in relationship.
mhm. So, if you were to tell somebody who's new at developing a relationship with the land, what practices or awarenesses would you suggest that they hold or try and work on?
I think that's what a lot of the introspections in the chapters of the book are designed to help people do. And some of it is challenging yourself philosophically. Like, as we're having this conversation, as people are listening to us have this conversation, what parts of them are resisting? And what parts of them are saying, yes, I've actually had those kind of experiences. I didn't really know what it was. I like to take people back to, what was your favorite place when you were 4 and 5 years old? Like what was your favorite thing to do, your favorite place to be? I've never had anybody say, in the house watching television, not once ever. It is always, playing with the neighbor's cat out by the creek when I was little, or outside riding my bicycle, or playing in the woods when I was growing up. It's always something nature centric, and there's usually a bluebird or a specific tree that really is prominent in their memory, and I invite them to go back to that now with this animistic awareness and explore what the relationship with that place and that tree or that bird was. Like, what other dimensions of that are available to you now that maybe you didn't have access to or didn't need to think of in an analytical way when you were 4 and 5 years old?
And I think that's important that I wanted to add is what you just said. It's important to get to suspend disbelief, get out of your analytic head, and maybe dive into this through the feeling state. Because if you start questioning somebody when you remember this, well, how did it feel? And then if you take it a little further, what do you think was the bluebird saying to you? I mean, the stuff that people actually have access to, I think, can be gotten in those intuitive realms and the more hidden realms by going in through the feeling state.
Definitely. And
Mhm,
what might your relationship to Bluebird be now knowing that?
mhm,
And it's very simple acts. Learn what your ecosystem wants. Learn who's there. Like really grounded, factual stuff. Who's there? What does it need? What does this season dictate that its needs are? And give those things. I always tell people nature loves an offering. Make sure it's one that isn't going to tip the ecosystem in some
mhm.
harmful way or attract attention that you don't want to have up close, but literally leaving things out that your ecosystem needs, that your birds need. And do it with intention. Like, just do it with a tiny prayer, do it with a statement aloud. If you're in a place where you can say these things aloud, I am in this place intentionally to engage relationship with you. And if you do that every day for a week, it will not take a week before, as you said, you start
Mhm.
feeling an intelligent presence speaking back to you.
So one of, yes, I love that. I love that. And to me, that's the biggest gift I gained from starting to explore shamanism is to really stop and feel the parts of the universe, the other world, the unseen world, to feel. I've always been connected to animals, but um, to really deepen into feeling it. I mean, we just an aside, we can feel when we don't feel good in a place.
Hmm.
I mean, we can feel like, let's get out of here. This is, and the more you practice your feeling state, the more you'll have messages that come through or intuitions that guide you. We have probably 10 minutes or so left. Um, I'd like to talk about what you talk about in your book, From Elder to Ancestor, the importance of connecting to your body, the embodiment, and how that helps develop your sacred self. Can you talk about that?
Definitely. I think it's challenging because we've had a lot of recordings kind of layered in what sacredness means and what sacred self means. And I think we each have to spend time with that to come into relationship with what it really is. And so I'm always really careful to not prescribe this is what it is or this is what you're looking for. What I notice when I talk about self as sacred is people automatically think I'm juxtaposing one part of myself as higher or more spiritually superior than the rest of me. That has never worked for me. like like ranking parts of myself has never worked. And so for me, it's coming from this place of wholeness and understanding that there is a part of me that positions itself in a very earthly place and it knows how to work things here. And it's also transpersonal. It is also firmly rooted into other beyond here. And it can draw on the skills of both of those components of who I am and inform me if I allow it to. And for me, this kind of breaks people often when I say it, but body is how I connect into that. We've like, especially through the 90s, there's been this mind, body, soul. But the emphasis has always been soul's better. Like soul's the one you really want. And if you're tapped into soul, everything else will be fine. As an animist, that does not work for me. It is all soul. Body is soul. Body has its own relationship to the sacred, apart from what my mental or philosophical projection of that is. And so I think you can call that embodiment, but again, I think that's a sticky word that we have to kind of reclaim from these like Instagram presences that only put embodiment forward as being super present or incredibly aware, and it feels magnificent. If you're in a body that is disabled, if you're in a body that is chronically ill, neurodivergent, I have all of that going on myself. It doesn't feel great to be in my body. It doesn't feel great to have this experience of full presence. But I have to accept that all of that is who I am and it's all sacred. I don't necessarily like it, but it's all sacred. And for me, when I can get to that place of oneness with myself, then I feel embodied. Then I do feel sacred. I feel connected to the ecosystem. I feel connected to nature and the planet and beyond the planet. So there's a lot going on in that body connection for me that is deeply spiritual. And I always encourage people to explore how you get there. Like try all the things. Try the step 1, step 2 sort of here's a way you can do it. And if that doesn't get it, keep going. That doesn't mean it is not there for you. Doesn't mean your sacredness can't be felt. Doesn't mean you can't be embodied in the way that feels right and works for you to experience oneness. Keep exploring and let yourself be open to what's available.
I think one thing that might be a barrier for many people is how society has built this concept of shame for any body that doesn't fit the perfect mold. And how many of us have carried around that shame. So that was just one thought, and how to really, really let that go. And the other thought I have is when I think about the energetics of it, when I think about, we talk again, this is a new age thing, you've got high vibration and um, upper chakras and lower chakras. Well, literally, energetically, bringing in a refined energetic of a guidance from spirit and literally bringing it through our body into a creation that we put forth in the world. Energy is really manifesting through our 3D everything. So that's one thought. The other is when I think, when in my meditations, when I go down into atomic level, and I'm not at all saying that what I see is accurate, but I can sense the molecular vibration that when I dive deep enough, I actually, and this has happened multiple times, I'll go through that and end up in the galaxy. So my sense of that, or how my intellect makes sense of that, is the actual molecular structure. Our atoms are literally stardust, the same atomic minerals and metals, and the vibrational patterns are literally what exists for planets as well. So to me, that strengthens my knowing that we are not different.
Agreed. And to like dial that in on a super personal level, which I don't experience that I can't speak, that the personal is separate from all things. Shame is a being. Like if we're going with the awareness that everything is alive and everything has agency and we're in relationship, shame is a being and it is a relationship that we're in, and we can engage that being. Like one way that I do that is
Mhm.
ask the spiritual manifestation of shame to come sit with me. I do a lot of having tea in my
Mhm.
underworld space. I invite beings to come have tea with me, and sometimes there's talking, sometimes there's no talking. There's just felt sense. There's just deep knowing. But there's this, it levels the playing field. It makes us the same. It makes me on par with shame and shame on par with me. And we can have a conversation that helps me to be in a healthier relationship with shame. And I don't have to hold on to it. I can let it go. I can let it move on to do whatever its next version of itself is.
And what I like about that is so many times we've been in our spiritual practices been asked to do processes of sitting with our inner child sitting next to us, or our future healed self. But that's also very powerful to invite the being of shame or mistrust or something to really converse with that. That's very powerful. We so like to go to the stuff that feels all glittery and let's look at our healed self. Oh, how exciting. Well, how about if we look at the parts of us that are hurting, the parts of us
I
that
would
are.
skip over it if I could too. I mean, really, if I'm honest, I would skip over it too, but it doesn't work that way. And that's that whole you get to the point of like, okay, am I going to be one of the unquiet dead, or am I going to be an ancestor that moves on well? I have to sit and have tea with shame. That's just part
Mhm.
of the deal that I have to do.
I like that. So, Kelley, we have about 2 minutes left. Would you tell the listeners first, tell them one thing or two things that you would really like them to remember or to try. And then if you would tell people how they can get in touch with you to learn more from you.
I think something that cracks people up all the time when I talk about like learning to do rituals that help you take your atmosphere as being alive is to approach the things that you already do as sacred. It's not about incorporating this big high ritual that you can't do after you've worked all day. It's about brushing your teeth with the sacred perspective. It's about realizing the elements that are involved and the relationships that are involved with the toothpaste and the brush and the countertop and you and your body and how you feel. Like, truly, brush your teeth as a sacred experience. Call in the space. Like, the things that you're going to do when you want to do all the big ritual, do that before you brush your teeth and just observe. Observe how brushing your teeth becomes something else. Everybody laughs when I say that, but it's true. It
Mhm,
really
mhm,
changes your brain about how you're moving through regular space time all the time.
mhm.
As far as how people can find me, I everything you would want to know is at soulintentarts.com. That is my practice, Soul Intent Arts, and that is my website.
Perfect. So, everybody, this is Doc Martin, Maximum Medicine, and this has been conversation with Kelley Harrell. And I thank you so much for joining me and having such good conversations about basically cleaning up our act so that we can heal everything around us, even going back into our lineage and restoring our connection with the land. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.